"Raise your hands, we need to see them clearly!" The Coast Guard lieutenant roared through the speaker, his cold gaze locked onto the small wooden boat swaying offshore in Bar Harbor, Maine. Samuel Carter, an 82-year-old man with silver hair, slowly lifted his trembling hands, his face serene, his deep-set eyes fixed on the officers boarding the boat, trampling paint cans and an old photograph frame. "Is there a problem, officers?" he asked, his voice low and gentle, like waves lapping the hull. They accused him of defacing the vessel, with a depiction of an old warship. But what no one expected was that just 1 hour later, the United States Navy would arrive, bringing a team of artists to honor him. Who is Samuel, and what secret lies behind those brushstrokes? All right, my dear audience, get ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly resonate with what I'm sharing here, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see viewers joining us from all around the world. Samuel Carter lives in a small wooden house nestled quietly on the docks of Bar Harbor. It's a place where time itself seems to have chosen to slow down. At 82, he needs no smartphone. He needs no tablet. He doesn't give the slightest thought to social media or breaking news. All he needs is his battered old radio, still playing those vintage jazz tunes each dusk. The melodies drift in like familiar whispers, settling softly in his heart. Clara, the partner who had walked beside him through almost an entire lifetime, left him 10 years ago. Since then, the house has felt hollow. Its rooms echo with silence. Every object seems steeped in a flicker of memory. But the treasure Samuel holds most carefully is his little wooden boat, aptly named Clara's Song. That vessel is more than mere transport. It is his farewell. It is his remembrance. It is where his heart anchors between past and present. Each morning, before the first light has fully banished the mist over the harbor, Samuel is already there. He moves slowly, his sinewy hands inspecting each rope, each anchor, every motion conducted as though it were a sacred ritual never to be skipped. Then he settles down, wiping the hull with a faded cloth, tenderly, ritualistically, reverently. No one understands why this frail old man heads out onto the bay every day. He neither fishes, nor casts nets, nor trades. He only rows out into the open water, stops mid-bay, opens his small toolkit, and begins to paint. On the wooden flank of Clara's Song, he painstakingly carves the outline of the USS Eldridge, the warship on which he served through the brutal years of World War II. The etchings are neither precise nor elaborate. Some have even faded with time. Yet within each line lies a vivid memory, a fierce battle, a fallen comrade, a night without sleep when guns thudded relentlessly. To Samuel, those grooves are not mere markings on wood. They are memories, raw, haunting, yet infinitely precious. Though the war receded decades ago, for veterans like Samuel, it never truly departs. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he jolts awake to phantom sirens, or visions of ships consumed by flame. But in Frenchman's Bay, with waves softly lapping his vessel's side, he finds a measure of peace. No gunfire, no orders, no comrades lost to enemy fire, only himself, and those unfinished carvings faithfully recounting a story no one asks about, yet he feels compelled to preserve. The townsfolk of Bar Harbor have grown accustomed to seeing the silver-haired old man row out each dawn and return only when the sun stands high. They never question, they never pry. Occasionally, a child will whisper that he's drawing treasure maps. Little do they know, his true treasure lies not in the depths of the sea, but deep within his soul. Back on shore, Samuel often settles into the chair by the window, Clara's favorite spot for reading. His hand rests lightly on the armrest. His gaze drifts toward the bay where the boat rests as quietly as he does. In those moments, he needs no comfort. He needs no company. What he needs is to be remembered, to remember Clara, to remember old friends, to remember the younger self who once was bold, unbreakable, and alive. More than once, someone has offered to buy his boat, to pay handsomely for an antique piece of craftsmanship. He only smiles softly and shakes his head. To him, Clara's song is not for sale. It is the last remnant that gives his life meaning. Perhaps once the final carving is done, he will finally have the courage to let go. One afternoon, passers-by found Samuel sitting motionless on his boat, a small carving knife held in his hand but unmoved. His eyes were inscrutable, neither sad nor joyful, only a profound stillness, as if he conversed with someone unseen. Perhaps Clara, perhaps his former self, perhaps the spirits of those who lie at some distant sea. The next day, Clara's song remained docked. But Samuel did not row again. He sat by the window, gaze distant as ever, holding an old photograph. No one asked why. For some stories require no explanation. They live on by themselves, like the waves beyond the shore that continue their gentle song, whether or not anyone listens. Samuel Carter, a former sailor, a devoted husband, a keeper of memories. And Frenchman's Bay, the place he visits each day, not to begin something new, but to carry on what has long been in his own quiet way. One autumn morning, when the entire world still lay wrapped in silence, Samuel Carter sat perched on the side of his boat, Clara's song. He carefully traced the outline of an ancient fort upon the weathered wooden hull. His hands, thin, knobby, freckled with age spots, clutched the paintbrush with effort. They trembled, betraying the toll of his years. Each stroke was a memory, a fragment of the past where he had fought and sacrificed. He did not paint for decoration. He did not paint for anyone else. He painted to preserve, to keep those recollections from dissolving with time, to ensure that he, himself, could still glimpse a part of his younger self in every detail. Suddenly, the roar of an engine shattered the morning's stillness. A Coast Guard patrol boat emerged, parting the waves with unmistakable purpose. This was no chance encounter. The spray slammed into Clara's song, sending the small craft rocking. Samuel remained seated, gripping his brush to keep it from slipping. Then a cold, commanding voice crackled through a loudspeaker. "Put down your brush and raise your hands." No explanation, no greeting. The patrol boat closed in. 3 young officers climbed aboard Samuel's vessel. Leading them was Lieutenant Daniel Harper, his youthful face set stiff with duty and protocol. His eyes flicked over the hull. They halted on the half-finished warship sketch. His brow furrowed. Suspicion glinted in his gaze. In a brief, silent moment, Samuel gently set the brush aside. No resistance, no protest. He lifted his frail hands, each knuckle trembling, not from fear, but simply from age. Lieutenant Harper paced the length of the boat, inspecting every inch as if seeking incriminating evidence. Then he turned back, his voice as hard as stone. "You are violating harbor regulations. Painting on a registered vessel constitutes defacement of public property." Samuel offered no reply. He merely looked at Harper. His gaze held no anger, no pleading, only the weight of exhaustion. Eyes that had witnessed life and death wash past like tides. Eyes that had seen young sailors fall on a ship's deck before they could even whisper their mothers' names. Those eyes now shone with calm acceptance, as if he had known this moment would come and had been ready for it. One of the junior officers, freshly graduated, leaned in and murmured to Harper, "It looks like the USS Eldridge." Harper glanced toward the sketch again, expression unchanged. Yet for a single heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. He had heard that name before, the vessel steeped in legend and history. But duty was duty. There was no room for sentiment. "No matter what it is, you had no right to paint it here," Harper repeated, as though pronouncing a foregone judgment. Samuel bowed his head. No argument. No justification. Perhaps he knew that his words would fall unheard. He had served his country. He had braved firestorms at sea. He had carried his shipmates home on a battered hull. Yet none of those deeds accorded him special privileges now. They existed only as faded lines in forgotten records, no longer carried on the wind. His hands remained raised, quivering, but he offered no resistance. The brush lay on the deck, its white paint still wet. Each painted line on the wood might now serve as evidence of wrongdoing, a crime, when for him they were merely his final plea not to be forgotten. 1 minute passed, then 2. No one spoke. Finally, Harper signaled his team to return to their boat. No handcuffs, no detention, and yet not a single apology. As they prepared to leave, Harper paused and looked back at Samuel. In that fleeting glance between the old veteran and the young officer, something unspoken flickered, perhaps a dash of confusion, perhaps a belated respect. But it passed as swiftly as the wave that rocked the hull. Once they had gone, Samuel remained standing, silent. He bent slowly, retrieved his brush from the deck. He did not resume painting. He only held it, a symbol of something remote, yet never lost. Memory, honor, and those truths no regulation could ever erase. Clara's song drifted off quietly. No hurry, no explanation. Only Samuel remained, an indelible part of history, before a world that no longer saw him as they once had. Yet there he stayed, holding on to the last precious thing remaining, the right to be remembered. They stepped onto the little boat as though approaching the scene of an unsolved crime, the air taut as a stretched string. 3 officers split up to search every nook and cranny, their eyes flicking quickly yet coldly. Heavy footsteps thudded on the damp wooden deck, shattering the silence that belonged solely to Samuel. He stood motionless, gaunt and weathered, much like the vessel he protected, his gaze following their every move, not anger, not panic, but only a nameless exhaustion. They began with his art kit, the box where he kept brushes, paint, carving knives, and the few half-carved wood scraps. One young officer used his foot to flip open the lid, tipping a can of white paint. It spilled across the deck like a fresh wound. No one apologized. No one cared. Only Samuel, whose eyes tracked each rivulet of paint tracing the hull, as if he watched something precious break beyond repair. Then Ryan, the youngest officer, fumbled backward toward the helm and accidentally kicked something solid. It was the weathered photo frame placed carefully beside the wheel, the picture of Clara, the woman he had loved all his life, now gone. The frame clattered to the deck, rolled twice, then lay face down on the wet wood. Samuel gently turned his head. No word was spoken, but his eyes, the eyes of a man who had seen his most sacred treasure topple, froze the moment in time for those few fleeting seconds. No one bothered to retrieve it. Harper stepped closer, his voice laced with the familiar tone of accusation he must have used 1,000 times before. He demanded to see the boat's registration and Samuel's identification. Not briskly, not politely. Samuel raised a trembling hand and pointed to a small wooden drawer on the hull's side. Harper signaled Ryan to open it. Ryan yanked the handle, flinging the drawer wide and sending a frayed map and a faded cloth-bound journal tumbling onto the deck. Harper crouched, picked up the neatly folded papers and flipped through them slowly, clearly not out of respect. The name emerged beneath the faint ink: Samuel Carter, age 82. He frowned, read the name aloud, and looked up with suspicion as though hunting for some loophole to condemn. "What are you doing with these drawings? This isn't the place for random doodling," he said, his voice ice cold. Samuel met his gaze. No challenge, no plea, just the presence of a memory long left homeless. He answered softly, in a low voice, "I paint what I remember." No immediate reaction. Perhaps because the answer was too simple. Perhaps because it did not fit their expected script. But Harper was not satisfied. In his mind, the drawings, the memories, the silence of an old man, all could signify something suspicious. Thus, the next command rang out like a harsh sentence. "Continue your inspection. These drawings may relate to unusual activity." Samuel did not respond further. He simply stood, one hand still resting on the hull, his eyes fixed on the fallen photograph. His shoulders slumped, not from humiliation, but because his heart felt hollow. So many years at the helm in open seas, so many life and death battles, so many comrades left stranded beneath the waves, now all reduced to a bleak phrase: unusual activity. The paintbrush lay in a deck corner, its white paint still wet against the wood. The half-carved USS Eldridge etched on the hull lay abandoned, as though his wartime valor had been wiped away by silent suspicion. No one asked why he carved the ship. No one asked about his experiences. No one realized that each drawing was not whimsy, but the only way for a man to salvage the fragments of memory slipping from his mind. The officers carried on with their search, checking every compartment, every cloth scrap, every box of tools. But they found nothing amiss. Just an old man, an aged boat, a photo face down on the deck, and unfinished sketches. Yet to them, that very silence was the most suspicious element of all. For Samuel, those moments stretched longer than any storm he had ever weathered. Because this time, it was not his life in jeopardy, but his truth, his lifetime's truth, denied by cold eyes and questions that need no answers. When Harper flipped to the journal's final page and saw the faint handwritten lines about Clara, about the sea, about the nightmares after the war, he paused. For an instant, his expression softened. Then he closed the journal and set it aside without a word. The team withdrew. No handcuffs, no arrests, but not a single apology, not one backward glance. Samuel remained standing. When they had gone, he stepped slowly to retrieve the photo frame, gently wiped its glass with his sleeve. The frame was intact, but something inside him, long cracked, had split wide that morning, a fissure only he could feel. Dear listeners, sit back and relax, or sip a glass of water, then stay tuned for the surprising turn of events to come. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Tension clung to the boat's cabin like an invisible fog. It stretched on relentlessly, with no escape. Harper stood amid the deck, clutching Samuel's papers so tightly that his knuckles whitened. His gaze remained fixed on the hull, mottled with fresh paint, as though he tried to piece together scattered details into a charge. Around him, the younger officers fumbled through their search, impatient and clumsy. Ropes were yanked loose. A paint can clattered onto the deck once more, its white streak billowing like the final drop that overflows a cup. Samuel stood silently. His posture remained unchanged. Only his eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, as if accustomed to being misjudged. No anger, no resentment, merely a calm look bearing layers of memory. Years of service, comrades now gone, battles he had survived, all condensed into the gaze of an old man, watching a new generation fail to recognize the living history before them. Beside Harper, the radio crackled unexpectedly, slicing through the heavy air. The commanding voice from base rang out clearly, no need for emphasis, yet still halting the entire group in their tracks. "Lieutenant Harper, cease your actions immediately. Show proper respect to Mr. Carter." Harper's brow furrowed. He had no time to react. His hand stayed grasped around the papers, as if the command were a mistake or, worse, an untimely interference. But the voice over the radio did not stop. It continued, this time clearer and more measured, as though each word had been carefully weighed. Mr. Samuel Carter, retired United States Navy captain, served aboard the USS Eldridge during World War II, awarded the Purple Heart and Silver Star for saving 14 shipmates in the battle off Okinawa. The statement fell like a decisive blow, severing every doubt. The boat's atmosphere collapsed in an instant. All eyes turned to the elderly man still standing, no explanation yet given, his expression unchanging. The radio crackled again, this time softer, as if burdened by the revelation. "Furthermore, we have just received notice from the Navy. An honor guard is en route to your position to pay tribute to Mr. Carter, not to detain him." In that moment, the entire world seemed to pause. Harper froze. The stack of papers in his hand felt suddenly weighty, not evidence of wrongdoing, but proof of a grave misunderstanding. His face shifted, from cold authority to confusion, then to regret. He had doubted a man whose name was etched in history, not merely a citizen, but a surviving emblem of an era he had known only through textbooks. The young officers around him stood awkwardly. No one spoke. One timidly stooped to retrieve Clara's photo frame, gently setting it upright on the deck. The paint can was righted as well, though the splatter remained, an undeniable testament to their ignorance. Samuel said nothing. He did not need to. There was no triumph here, only a profound silence carrying the echo of an old wound reopened, not by enemy fire, but by an oblivious new generation. At last, Harper stepped forward, his hands loosening on the papers he held against his chest. But as he prepared to speak, Samuel raised a hand, small, dignified yet firm. Not to refuse an apology, but to halt one he knew could never heal the fracture that had formed. The silence deepened, heavier than ever, not from tension, but from realization, that among countless orders and protocols, they had overlooked a fundamental truth. Heroes do not always wear medals. Sometimes they bear scars too deep to display. Samuel turned and walked slowly to the stern, where his brush still lay on its side, its white paint now hardened into a jagged line. He picked it up, wiped the dried paint with his familiar cloth, and placed it back in its spot. Everything resumed as before, yet nothing would ever be the same. Harper and his team withdrew in silence. No farewells, no justification. They left behind a lingering void, the only thing powerful enough to encompass all that had transpired. On the old boat, Samuel remained standing, a sentinel of memory. No accolades, no ceremony, only the imperative to be remembered. That a man once faced the fires of war, not for glory, but for duty. And now he continued his fight, not against an external enemy, but against the erasure of remembrance. Silence settled over the deck like a thick blanket, smothering all the words that should have been spoken long ago. After the radio transmission, after the commander's confirmation, no one dared meet the gaze of the man they had doubted just minutes before. Harper gripped Samuel's papers a moment longer, as if their weight had multiplied. At last, he stepped forward quietly, his hand trembling as he returned the slightly crumpled sheets to their owner. Harper's voice was barely audible, as though swallowed by his throat. Only the echo of shame remained. His apology, awkward and frail upon the boat's deck, carried none of the gravity of what had transpired. But Samuel did not react. He merely nodded slowly as one accustomed to life's belated regrets. No reproach, no sigh, just quiet acceptance, because some things, once they must be explained, ought never to have occurred. He bent to retrieve Clara's small photo frame, gently wiping the salty smear from its glass with his sleeve. The motion was unhurried, devoid of fury, simply the careful act of someone determined to preserve a once sacred memory in a world that seemed to have forgotten it. The worn, faded photograph remained intact, just like his recollection of the woman he loved, whole and undiminished by time. The young officers began to clean up in silence. They righted the overturned paint cans, gathered the scattered papers, resecured the loosened rope. Yet no amount of effort could undo what had occurred. The paint splatter on the deck could not be erased, and the ache in their hearts went unspoken. No one dared look back at the silver-haired man, whom, only an hour earlier, they had eyed with suspicion. Then, from the horizon, a distant sound reached them. A large Navy ship appeared, drawing steadily closer to the harbor, its signal flag snapping proudly in the breeze. The vessel carried a different wave, not of inspection or enforcement, but of recognition. The silence aboard Clara's song was ripped once more, this time by something profoundly different. The air itself shifted, as if history were about to step aboard. When the great ship dropped anchor, a group of people moved forward, not officers, not inspectors, but a team of professional artists commissioned by the Navy, dressed impeccably, carrying paint tubs, brushes, and drafting tools. They came up the ramp as though well versed in their mission, without hesitation, without display. No explanation was needed. It had all been arranged. Samuel watched calmly, then stepped back to allow the artists to begin their work. No direction was required. They knew exactly what to do, to recreate the combat journey of an aging sailor upon the very boat he called home. Clara's song, already etched by time, would be adorned with a new layer of memory, vivid memories painted in color, born from gratitude and restoring honor. They started with the first strokes on the hull, the image of the USS Eldridge, majestic amid swirling smoke, the ship leaning into tempestuous waves. Next, they painted drifting plumes of haze across the Pacific Ocean, the sea that had concealed so much horror. Then, with precise lines, 14 human silhouettes emerged, 14 shipmates that Samuel had risked his life to save during the bloody battle off Okinawa. Harper stood at the deck's edge, witnessing each detail spring to life, Every brushstroke seemed to hammer at his conscience, rendering his earlier justifications absurd and petty. The junior officers beside him remained silent, their eyes a mixture of awe and disbelief. They no longer saw an old man hunched over with brush and memories. They saw living history, a man who had written what they had only read in training manuals. Samuel did not lift a hand to paint. He sat quietly, the photo of Clara held gently as though inseparable from him. Occasionally, his gaze flicked to the images unfurling on the hull, as though confirming that the past was being faithfully restored. Yet he did not adjust a single line. Because now, those memories no longer belonged solely to him. They were being retold, publicly, with dignity, and just as they deserved. When the final stroke was applied, the hull ceased to be mere weathered wood. It became a storytelling masterpiece. A tale that needed no dialogue, no medals, only to be seen, understood, and remembered. And for the first time since that morning, Samuel allowed himself a faint smile, a weary but peaceful smile. Not born of honor bestowed upon him, but because he knew that what he had lived, lost, and sacrificed had finally been acknowledged. Not through ceremony, but through color. Not on paper, but upon the very boat to which he had moored his life. The next day, Harper returned to Bar Harbor alone. No uniform, only a box of coffee and a heart heavy with regret. Samuel was preparing his boat for a new outing, the hull now ablaze with paintings that recounted his life's story. Harper hesitated as he approached. He asked permission to speak. He told of his father, a sailor who had served in the Navy and always taught him to respect those who came before. Yesterday, Harper had forgotten that lesson. Samuel paused in tightening a rope. He looked at Harper with deep, knowing eyes. "Everyone makes mistakes," he said. "What matters is what you do afterward." Harper asked if he might row alongside Samuel, not to paint, not to fish, but simply to learn. On Frenchman's Bay, the two men rowed in silence. They watched the reflections of the paintings on Clara's song ripple across the water. Samuel pointed to the 14 silhouettes. His voice low, he explained, "Each one of them is a reason I refuse to give up." Harper listened. He felt the weight of those simple words. When the sun sank, they returned to the harbor, no trophies in hand, but Harper carried with him an enduring lesson. Respect is owed not only to heroes honored in books, but also to those who quietly paint memories upon a wooden boat. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see viewers tuning in from around the world. Comment 1 if you enjoyed the story, so we can continue bringing you more compelling tales.